So tonight we're going to talk about karma, the notion of karma. And I want to mention too, for those of you who have access to the internet, that if you go to a search engine like Google or just any good search engine, and you type in the word aphorisms, and then a plus sign, and then the word karma, aphorisms plus karma, if you type that into a search engine, you'll get a result that'll be an article called Aphorisms on Karma, from which many of the ideas of this talk came. And it's well worth reading if you're at all interested in karma. It's 33 aphorisms on karma, written by a man who said it was given to him by teachers. Those aphorisms were given to him in his own studies, one at a time, to ponder and study and try to understand. So if you want to look further into this, it's probably the best source, single source, that thing on aphorisms on karma, because it's just 32, fairly short. Each one's like a paragraph. Some of them are only a sentence. And well worth looking at if you're interested in the subject of karma, because there's so many misconceptions about it in this culture. Because most everyone these days is familiar with the word. You know, the word's gotten out, and but it's even gotten onto bumper stickers. You know, like, my karma ran over your dharma, stuff like that. But I'm going to talk about it from the standpoint of those aphorisms and other things I've been taught and I've thought about over the years, which is a fairly fundamental view of karma, you could say. It's not a new agey view of karma. There are a lot of misconceptions going around about karma. And one thing it isn't is punishment. So if somewhere you picked up the idea that karma is some kind of punishment, it isn't. Unless you consider instant death when you hit the sidewalk after having jumped off a tall building punishment. That's really not punishment, it's just the result of your action. So karma is not punishment. Another thing I wanted to say, just at the beginning, is that karma isn't administered by any agency outside of oneself. There's no agency administering karma to us, any more than there's an agency administering the air we breathe. You know, it's just part of what is. But there's not some agency behind it that's quote-unquote rewarding us or quote-unquote punishing us. So there's no notion of an external agency administering karma. And so those are good, two conceptions to drop if you happen to have them, because they don't have anything to do with the idea of karma. But they're kind of westernized versions due to the corruption of our Western religions. Yeah. So to start kind of abstractly, it's said that karma is a universal law. It's a law. It's been called the law of moral causation when applied to humans, the law of moral causation. But it's a law, just like the law of gravity or like any of the laws of science. It's just part of the nature of the universe. And it's a law, it says, that tends to restore the equilibrium. So if you want to think about, well, what is this law of karma about? It's about restoring equilibriums in a world of symphonious disharmonies, you know, because everything's polarity. But karma is the thing that restores the equilibrium and the polarity. And anyone familiar with science, of course, would have kind of a head start here because they're aware of the polarities and how it all gets kind of balanced. Well, that's a good model on one plane for what's going on every plane, according to the idea of karma. Everything's constantly tending toward equilibrium. But that doesn't mean that it's happening in ways that we see or in our time. Well, why hasn't that been adjusted? Maybe it has, and you didn't notice, or maybe it's not time yet. One very important thing about karma that it says in those aphorisms on karma, which kind of will put this talk in perspective, is that only sages and seers actually understand it. Only sages and seers actually understand it. But it said that people like us can nonetheless try to understand how effects flow from causes. And by doing that, we can start getting an idea of what they're calling karma. But in fact, the only people who actually understand it, and we're not talking intellectual understanding here, you could say who actually see it, are sages and seers. It said that for us to look at another human being and think we have some idea of their karma is probably false. We probably don't have much of an idea of what's really going on there. And the person involved may or may not have much of an idea of what's really going on there. Yeah. So there's kind of an agnosticism here built into this lecture, that even though we can form certain ideas about it and think about them and ponder them, like those aphorisms on karma, we're probably a long way from actually understanding what it is. Now it said that it's this universal law that operates on every plane of being. Those of you who are materialists, probably not many people in this room, but if any of you are materialists, so you think this is the only plane of being, well, it operates here. Yeah, and but it operates also, it said, on the very highest conceivable planes of being. It also operates there, and on every level of matter, from physical apparent matter down to subatomic particles. So everything in the universe is under the sway of this tendency to restore equilibrium. Nothing's exempt. Which is to say, as it has been said, we live in a universe of law, capital L. There's no uncaused effect. There's nothing random. Random means we don't see the causes. That's all it means. There's no coincidence. There's no accident. Accident means we didn't see the causes. It's said that even cataclysms of nature those two are manifestations of karma. And even though we might trace them back to a physical cause, it says in these aphorisms on karma, in fact, the physical cause we trace them back to is itself the effect of the cause of the doings in humanity's mind. So even physical cataclysms are traceable back to humans collectively, and it's said. So it's a universal law, but the place where it's probably most helpful for us to think about it is, well, what's it got to do with us humans, rather than what's it got to do with universes and cosmoses and stuff. But it does there too, it's said. So with us humans, it said that karma operates on three levels with every one of us. The first one is body and circumstances. We all have a body, and it's in some set of circumstances. That's a field of karma. In the body we're in the circumstances it's in, we ourselves caused. There's no external causation in this idea whatsoever. So who we are, where we were born, to whom we were born, when we were born, the circumstances into which we were born, the circumstances in which we are right this moment is all the product of our own doing. not necessarily in this life, which is why you can't really separate karma from reincarnation, but we are for the moment. Yeah.
I don't know if you want to address this, but going back to your statement a short while ago about all physical cataclysms are due to human consciousness or
Right.
something, even in the case, say, of the most solidly accepted understanding of why the dinosaurs were all wiped out is an asteroid hit the planet.
Mm-hmm.
We think we know where.
Right.
And something like 70-80% of species were wiped out.
Right.
This was way before humans evolved on this planet.
Right.
Were that is there some human consciousness that was happening before then on some other plane? Or?
Well, that's a good question, actually, but it's a little beyond the scope of tonight, because the people that talk about karma the way I've been talking about it so far also claim that humans have been on the planet for 18 million years. Consequently, we were here when the dinosaurs were here.
So we just didn't leave any fossil evidence. Okay.
Correct. Although you might be surprised in the future. Yeah. But that's a good question, but it gets into more deeper metaphysics. And so anyway, we have these bodies and these circumstances, and someone trying to understand this idea of karma would have to be willing to consider the possibility, at least, that their body and their circumstances are self-produced. There isn't any external agency, as we said earlier, administering karma. So who I was born to, and what circumstances, and my current circumstances, it's all me. Okay, so that's one field of operation of karma is body and circumstances, and we can all relate to that because we all have both. But it's a field of karma. And what happens in it, like the things that come up, we have this body, it goes through a day and things happen. The things that happen are part of our karma. And from the standpoint of the people that talk this way, everything that happens, that comes up, is for the purposes of our learning. Yeah. So there's no such thing. If you see someone going through some horrible life and everything's going wrong and blah, 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 it's not necessarily bad karma. It might be that they've chosen that kind of life for the purposes of learning, discipline for the quote-unquote soul. Because out of hardship comes sympathy, fortitude, strength. Yeah. So it's not necessarily bad karma to have difficulties, is what we're saying. It might be bad karma not to, from the standpoint of the soul. Yeah. So obviously we're talking about soul here, so I'll have to say something about that, but that's part of the reincarnation talk we'll go into more then. But let's complete the three fields of operation of karma first. So there's a body and circumstances. Then there's a mind and the intellect. Separate field from body and circumstances. As you know, just with a little bit of thought, you can find people with horrible body circumstances, or seemingly horrible, who have absolutely brilliant minds.
Stephen Hawking.
Yeah, there's an example. So the mind and the intellect is a separate plane of karmic operation from the body and circumstances, and has to be understood as such. And what we mean by plane of operation of karma means action. So we obviously perform actions with our body in our circumstances. So that's a plane of where we lay down causes, which are going to have effects, which we may not be able to anticipate, but there will be effects. Okay, so the mind and intellect, which are not necessarily the same, the mind and the intellect, the one we have, so to speak, the mind we have as an individual, the intellect we have as an individual, is a product again of our past, of how we have used or developed or not developed the mind and the intellect in the past, either in this life or previous lives. So if we have a brilliant mind, there are causes for that. If we have a dull mind, there are causes for that. If we don't understand things very easily, intellectually speaking, there are causes for that. And so the mind and the intellect is a separate plane of our being from body and circumstances. There can be a certain kind of karma playing out in body and circumstances, and a completely different kind of karma playing out in the mind and the intellect. And of course, what other people know about us, unless they get to know us, is only our body and circumstances. So they may have no idea about what's playing out in our mind and our intellect. But something is in every human being. Every human being has a mind. Something's going on with it. And every human being has an intellect, and something's going on with it. Okay. So what kind of mind I've got, and what's going on in it, and what kind of intellect I have, and what's going on in it, is part of my karma from the past. I mean, making now the cutoff point. So right now is the product of my past in terms of my mind and my intellect. And then the third plane of operation of karma, or the third plane of our being that we all have, know it or not, is the psychic and the astral aspects. Psychic and the astral. Separate from the mind and the intellect.
Are you also saying that there's no inner plane?
No, we're not saying that.
Okay.
Yeah. But right now we're just separating them for purposes of starting somewhere. Yeah, so the psychic and astral planes, that would have to do with things like feelings, emotions, on one level. We all have those. It would have to do with the heart on another level, which is a complex set of variables in most cases. It would have to do with any kind of paranormal powers a person may have, like clairvoyance or clairaudience or telepathy. All of those types of things have to do with development karma in the psychic and astral parts of ourselves. Now, every human being has all three of these elements: body, circumstances, mind, intellect, psychic, and astral. And any one of them can be more or less highly developed. They can all be highly developed. None of them can be highly developed. I mean, the variables are infinite. But all of us are, from one point of view, as incarnated beings walking around living a life, all of us are a combination of these three levels. And they're not separate. But they're separable for purposes not only of understanding, but they're separable existentially. A person who's deep in thought isn't even aware of his body and circumstances. And a person who's in a meditative state isn't aware of his or her mind and intellect. So that they interact, but they are separable. And to be able to separate them at will is a very advanced stage of spiritual development. Because for most of us, they're kind of all intermixed. We kind of are going along through our day, we're thinking something and we're feeling something, and it's all happening at the same time. Because we're going too fast, basically, to sort it out. Now, they say that different lines of karma can manifest in all three aspects of a person. So it's not like it's necessarily, some people have a different kind of karma manifesting in all three, which is a fairly complex life to live insofar as they're conscious of all three. The circumstances may be one thing, and yet the mind and the intellect may be something that doesn't quite fit the circumstances. And the psychic and the astral may be a whole other thing. And to integrate all that, which is where your question comes in, is part of the enterprise, is to integrate these aspects of ourselves as they are, rather than wishing we were some other way, or in some other body, or in some other circumstance, or I wish I had a different kind of mind, or wishing, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride, as they say. So, like, karma is something that has to be studied, and one can get a pretty good idea of one's own karma just through self-study. Observing one's body. Well, one's body and circumstances are kind of obvious on one level, but observing one's mind. There it is. This is what it's telling you. It's not like a mystery or anything. Observing one's intellect. Observing one's feelings. One's hunches, one's intuitions. Intuitions would also be included in the astral and psychic, what we're calling astral and psychic planes of ourselves. So these are knowable just through kind of observation, where we are in it, what kind of karma we're experiencing. And they say that one sage said that if karma is properly understood, then everything that happens in my world, whether it's on whichever of those planes it happens on, if I have fully understood karma, not fully understood it, but kind of gotten the idea of karma, then everything that happens, my response to it will be, not necessarily literally, but my response to it will be, this is in fact exactly what I myself desired. Because that's why it's happening. It's the product of me.
Whether it feels good or not.
Whether it feels good or not, whether it's what I had in mind or not, the causes I have so far set down have led to this. Yeah, whatever this is, whether it's again, physical or mental or psychic astral.
You could almost say karma equals acceptance of what is.
Well, karma doesn't equal acceptance of what is, but acceptance of karma equals acceptance of what is.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was taught years ago, when I was full of fear and didn't know it, that one of the one thing a person has to work toward is what was called trust in karma. Because a lot of people think of karma as quote unquote bad. Or, if I do this, I'm going to get some bad karma. Karma's not good and bad. It's any more than a scientific law is good or bad. Is the law of gravity good? Let's have a debate. You got the levitators who say it's bad, and you got some other group that's praising it. The weight measurement people, they like gravity pretty much. Because they can weigh everything. So you have a big debate about whether it's good or bad, and the fact of the matter is it's just there. And it's just there. Karma is just there. Now, on the physical plane, we create karma, we create causes through our actions on the physical plane, including our speech, which is said to be the most powerful action we can do in terms of creating karma. We can create much more karma through our words than through a physical action with our body. Which is why Jesus said it's not what goes into your mouth that condemns you, but what comes out of it. Speech is very occult. It's probably our most occult power.
What do you mean by occult?
Powerful, effect producing. Well, we all know this. I mean, someone can ruin our day with a sentence. Very powerful stuff, especially if it's someone one admires or someone who one thinks is significant or knows something. I mean, they can destroy us with a few words. It's very powerful. So on the physical plane, the causes we lay down are physical actions and speech. And those produce those causes. Those are all causes. And it's said that karma is in a sense knowable even to us non-sages and non-seers. if we just study the causes that we're making, because it says that the effect is bound up in the cause and is not succeedent to it. In this sense, karma is, in fact, timeless. Because if we can, well, I mean, it's something as simple as some action one is contemplating, and one says, well, if I do this, what's going to happen? And you can kind of think it through, and not necessarily correctly all the time, but you can try, Here's this cause, what type of thing is this apt to lead to? And in that sense, you kind of get a little bit of a handle on karma, because what it's going to lead to is contained in the cause. It's right there. It's like the open lotus flower is contained in the seed. If you cut the seed in half, there's a outline of the blossom. It's already there. It just has to go through all that thing to manifest on top of the water. But what's manifesting is right there in the bulb we planted. It's just an example that's used to illustrate this point, that the effect is bound up in the cause. So in that sense, if we were thinkers, and that gets to the mind and the intellect, if we were thinkers, we wouldn't be all that surprised by some of the effects that we get. So, okay, yeah, this is happening because I did that. Duh. Well, we could have known ahead of time, and if we didn't want it, not done it. But then there are people who kind of like play with karma, because they know, this will lead to that, and they say, oh, well, I'll deal with it when I get there. I know, but I'll deal with it when I get there. I'll have 49 beers tonight, and I'll deal with it when I get there in the morning. I'll deal with the toilet bowl in the morning, or whatever. Well, you can play those games, but they might be a little more dangerous than that line of reasoning would lead one to think. Okay, so that's body and circumstances, causation, put really simply and probably over simply. But we lay down causes out here. To put it differently, everything we do is laying down a cause. There's nothing that we do that isn't a cause. Not necessarily a huge cause, but everything we do has effects. If we breathe in and breathe out, that affects, everything's affecting everything. So there's no way out. We can't not generate karma, or we can't not make causes. It's kind of like we can't not eat. We can't not breathe. And we can, but we'll die. So there's some things that are, karma means action, and we cannot not act. Even if we're just sitting, there's an effect. And everything in our body's creating causes. Okay. Then there's the the mind and the intellect, which is to me where karma gets a little more interesting, because the teaching is that every thought we have is a cause. And a strong thought is a strong cause, and a weak thought is a weak cause, but thoughts are causes. And this is harder to understand, especially if one's a materialist, because you can't verify it scientifically. You can't really, I see, yes, there's a thought, and there's its effect. But a clairvoyant can see these things.
Isn't there beginning to be, in physics, some evidence that thoughts are molecular?
Yes. Also cellular.
Mm-hmm.
There are levels of it. And this has all been taught in all the old mystery schools, but we're just beginning to get hey, maybe thoughts got something got cellular, and then maybe it's molecular, or maybe it's atomic. Well, in reality, it's all three.
The science of consciousness is pretty new in the West.
Yeah, real new.
Real new.
Yeah, but we're struggling along to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So every thought is a cause. And so if I'm sitting around having a bunch of negative thoughts about something or someone, I'm causing, the effect's bound up in the cause, and if the cause is negative, the effect's going to be negative. You know, if I sit around kind of moaning and groaning about how hard I have it all, and and I find I'm slightly down the next day, it shouldn't be any surprise. Of course you are. Look at the causes you set in motion just yesterday. You know, so thoughts are causes, and like the stuff that goes through our mind, all that's causing things. All that has effects, not just on ourselves. Yeah, it gets better, but all that has effects. The stuff that goes through our minds, and then the intellect, the ideas we entertain on purpose, those have effects, and the ideas that we believe in, that has effects. Like one of the statements of the sages is, realization comes from dwelling upon that which is to be realized. Typically, you know, you can't really. Oh, I see. Yes, there's that thought, and there's its effect. You know, but a clairvoyant can see these things.
Isn't there beginning to be in physics some evidence that thoughts are molecular?
Yes. Also cellular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are levels of it, and this has all been taught in all the old mystery schools. But we're just beginning to get a. Hey, maybe thoughts got something affects got cellular, and then maybe it's molecular, or maybe it's atomic. Well, in reality, it's all three.
The science of consciousness is pretty new in the West.
Yeah, real new.
Real new.
Yeah, but we're struggling along to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So every thought is a cause, and so if I'm sitting around having a bunch of negative thoughts about something or someone, I'm causing, you know, the effect's bound up in the cause, and if the cause is negative, the effect's going to be negative. You know, if I sit around kind of moaning and groaning about how hard I have it all, and and I find I'm slightly down the next day, it shouldn't be any surprise. Of course you are. Look at the causes you set in motion just yesterday. You know, so thoughts are causes, and like the stuff that goes through our mind, all that's causing things. All that has effects, not just on ourselves. Yeah, it gets better, but all that has effects. The stuff that goes through our minds, and then the intellect, the ideas we entertain on purpose, those have effects, and the ideas that we believe in, that has effects. Like one of the statements of the sages is, realization comes from dwelling upon that which is to be realized. If I understand karma conceptually, then I'll understand that I'm responsible for much more than I think I am, usually. Yeah. I mean, it gets gnarly. Like, here's an example. This is getting us a little bit off the thread, but we'll get back to it. But here's an example of how gnarly it can be. There was, some years ago, there's this man named, some of you may remember, named Juan Corona. He's the guy that killed a whole bunch of farm workers, serial killer type guy. He killed all these farm workers, and they finally caught him. Then they proved that it was him. But what they discovered is he had absolutely no recollection of having killed anybody. Yet he had. I mean, they had the DNA or whatever, you know, they could prove it. But he had no knowledge of having done anything. You know, when I asked my teacher what's going on in this kind of case, he said, well, what's going on in that kind of case is this Juan Corona fellow is a very weak, talking about psychic and astral level now, a very weak person, very passive, and therefore subject to the thoughts of others. So you got somebody sitting around thinking about how they'd like to kill a bunch of, say some really powerful mind sitting around thinking about how they just fantasizing about how they like to kill a bunch of farm workers and bury them or whatever, and getting off on this fantasy. And maybe in his corporate office. He's having a daydream about this. And poor Ron Corona has to go do it because it comes into his mind. But he didn't have the thought. So in that sense, we're quite responsible.
And that's a big one.
Yeah, stuff like that. We don't have and then if you don't just think of us as individuals, but think of us as groups, kind of all thinking alike. Well, that's generating, that goes out there, and affects people. And probably none of us know where our thoughts come from. When we quote have a thought, it just comes in that we didn't choose to have. It just pops in there. Well, that came from somewhere.
It's worth investigating.
Well, maybe it's worth investigating, maybe it isn't, but it definitely came from somewhere. Yeah. Who knows? But we live in an interactive universe is what this is coming down to. And I wanted to mention that there's something called the four golden links. The four golden links, which kind of help put all this subject in some perspective. The first one is called universal unity and causation. This gets metaphysical now. Universal unity and causation. In other words, everything that exists, the universe, everything in it, it's unified. It's one whole. It's one whole. And throughout that whole is causation. So just imagine this universal thing on the three planes we've already talked about. This universal thing on these three planes interacting with itself. Universal unity and causation. Yeah. Like in science, they're trying to find the unified field theory. They will, because it is unified. Yeah. So the sages have taught. And throughout that unity are these three layers of causation, karma. And then human solidarity is the second of the four golden links. Human solidarity. And what they mean by that is that humanity is one being. Humanity is humanity. And it interacts with itself. Obviously it interacts with itself in body and circumstances, but it also interacts with itself on the other two planes, but known only to people who can see on those planes. Like it interacts with itself on the mental and intellectual plane, and on the psychic and astral planes. Those especially. Okay, so universal unity and causation, human solidarity, then the last two links of the four golden links, karma, reincarnation. Okay, so if you put all those four together, you kind of have a huge picture of what's going on. In one sense, it's all interacting with itself, but in another real sense, we're all individuals. And they talk about the ego with a capital E, as opposed to the ego small e. And that's the subject for the third, personality and impersonality, or individuality. Personality, individuality. Individuality is like ego capital E. There's a part of us. It's not really a part of us. It's us. What we really are is a consciousness that's not caught up in or affected by anything out here at all. It's more like a pure observer, a pure witness, or if you want to use it's not really even a metaphor, but pure light. There's a part of us that's beyond the three aspects of us we've been talking about. It's some would call it our soul. My teachers call it ego capital E. And it's that we really are. That's what Rama Maharshi calls I-I, consciousness. We can experience ourselves on that plane as just like I am. There are different ways to put it. But it's what we really are. It's what incarnated into a certain configuration on the astral and psychic plane, into a certain mind and intellect, and into a certain body and circumstances. There's something that took those three things on in this particular life, voluntarily or involuntarily. So there's a part of us that's beyond the operation of karma, but that has things that needs discipline, it's said. Yeah. Yeah. And that's going through a series of lives, which we'll get to in the reincarnation lecture. We'll let that part go. The series of lives part go. But going through a series of lives. And, now it's said that a certain line of karma can predominate on any one of these three layers of ourselves. A certain line of karma can be happening. And you see this in people, like someone who's like sick all the time. That's a line of karma playing out. And or someone who has some kind of serious mental disorder, say on the mind plane, or some kind of addiction. That would be another a mind thing. And then you get people with all kinds of emotional problems. That would be the psychic astral thing. And this is keeping it pretty simple. Or you get people who have psychic problems. They hear and see things that other people don't see and hear, and it scares the hell out of them sometimes. Okay, well, these are lines of karma playing out in a particular life for that person. And then the question is, well, can these be changed? Or you just have to wait it out, or what?
Well, should they be?
Well, okay, or should they be? Well, it said that when a certain line of karma is playing out through a person, it's very precise. These people also talked about karma as though it's like integrated calculus or something. It's incredibly precise. It's so precise it would boggle the mind of the best mathematician. But they say when there's a certain line of karma playing out on any plane for a person, the evidence that it's playing out will be that the person's experiencing either pleasure or pain. So if you want to know whether any karma is happening to you, if you're experiencing pleasure or pain, it is.
Can anything occur that isn't karma?
No.
Right.
Yeah, that's their hope. Everything's karma. It's like a universal law. It's mind-boggling. These are just little seeds for thought. And if you check out those aphorisms on karma, there's more. But the more you think about it, the more it just gets deeper. Yeah. No, everything's karma. So if a certain line of karma is playing out, can it be changed? Well, if it's bringing pleasure, the person's probably not going to want to change it. But if it's bringing pain, there might be an incentive to change it. If it's bringing pain or unhappiness or suffering or, this sort of thing. Now, a lot of people, even though they're in pain and suffering and unhappy, they still don't want to change it. And it might just get worse and worse and worse and worse until they die, or kill themselves, Or maybe it's not something they can change, in which case they have the option of accepting it because it's there, not because they like it. But let's say I'm undergoing a certain line of karmic retribution. They call it retribution, but they don't mean punishment. It's just effects would probably be a cleaner word. Can it be changed? And they say there are two ways a line of karma can change. It can change through the power of a vow, V-O-W, or some similar kind of spiritual intention to take it on. It can be changed through countermeasures. Like I say, a person's obsessed with a certain kind of thinking that's bringing them down or causing them suffering. Can that be changed? Yeah, through the power of a vow and or through countermeasures. What would the countermeasures be for my obsessive thought that's driving me nuts or making me unhappy? Replacing it with the opposite, which is a practice. You just keep putting the opposite in there. It's difficult. Or, thirdly, a line of karma can be changed because it's the causes that set it in motion are exhausted. So it might the causes that set it in motion have exhausted themselves. So it just plays out. And then some other line of karma starts in a person's life, on any one of these planes, remember.
So if one sees a line of karma that's occurring in one's life, and let's call it negative or causing suffering, then the options would be let it play out or do something. And the allowing of playing it out, one could deepen the
karma. Yeah, because you're continually making more similar causes. Yeah, for the future to reap in the future. Yeah. So they say that in that regard, karma can be affected. It can be affected. And it says the degree to which it will be affected will be mathematically precisely determined by the sincerity, say, and depth of the vow, or the persistence of the countermeasures. Yeah. I mean, taking a vow isn't going to change anything unless some actions follow. And yeah. So karma isn't like... what's happening, to put it simply, what's happening in our lives can be changed. We can change it, or attempt to. With these people, like people in AA, they use something called the Serenity Prayer, which is, they pray for the serenity to accept the things they can't change, and the courage to change the things they can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that would apply to karma. To what does it make sense to try to change here? And what do I just have to accept? Like if I'm in a crippled body, trying to change that's probably not a very good idea. I'm just going to get frustrated. So I better accept that. I have a friend who was in a very active, athletic, kind of a macho, outdoor, male-type body until he was 18 and drank a little too much and used a little too many drugs one day and had an accident, and ever since he's been paraplegic. Now, that's karma, and it's taken him years to accept his paraplegic condition. He's gotten there. He got there. But it took him years and several very near suicide attempts because it just wasn't acceptable. But there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. So some karma, there's just, that's me, it's mine. But then there are things we can change, like our thinking. That's the main thing we can change, is our thinking, or the way we're living. We can undertake some kind of spiritual practice that's allegedly will ameliorate negative karma, and there are all kinds of those. But generally speaking, people in ignorance of karma and in ignorance of the fact that they're in charge, most people aren't doing anything about it. It's kind of living from day to day and sowing and reaping, sowing and reaping, sowing and reaping. But there's not much consciousness going on relative to the process. And, so any questions at this point, or comments, thoughts?
I don't want to say it might cause some karma.
Yeah. That's good. Not saying it might cause it too.
Oh, catch 22.
Don't forget sins of omission. Yeah. some people ponder, well, if there are no accidents and there's no destiny and there's no fate, it's all everything we're experiencing is a product of our own previous thinking and acting. Then where does free will come into this thing?
Well,
And the fact that we can do something now, but we don't have any free will relative to what's coming, to the causes we've already generated.
but we have free will with what we do with it.
Right.
As it occurs, moment to moment.
Right. But that's the only place we have free will.
Mm.
Yeah. So in that sense, there is destiny, but it's self-caused. They say it's self-caused, but it is destiny in the sense that it's said that karma can only manifest through a quote appropriate instrument. Meaning, again, keeping in mind these three planes, body, circumstances, mind, intellect, astral, psychic. If a person has a certain kind of karma from the past, it can only manifest if there's an instrument, one of those three planes, if there's an instrument that's appropriate to it. So the karma we're all experiencing now is exactly the karma that's appropriate to the, quote, instruments on those three planes that we have. Is that all of our karma? No. It said that we all have karma that we've generated, that we don't have the appropriate circumstances or instruments for it to manifest, so it's said to be in abeyance.
Not ripened yet.
It's not ripened. And even if eons go by before there's an instrument for it through which to manifest, it will retain its power and force until there's an appropriate instrument for it or circumstance for it.
So they say the wheels may grind slow, but they grind very fine.
Yeah. Yeah, they are, yeah. So we all have karma that's in abeyance. And that's what, people go to like tarot card readers and palm readers and stuff. That's really what they want to know. Is what they're really asking is, what's my upcoming karma? What kind of karma do I have in abeyance? And is it good or not? Will I meet him or her? Or whatever, So they're kind of asking about, can you see where my karma, what karma is heading my way? Because why else would you go to such a person? Or you might go to ask, can you see the karma that led me here? And if they're any good, they can. And if they're any good, they can do the other two, but they usually won't. Especially if it's negative, they won't tell you. Oh, it looks good enough, Whereas in fact, it may be dreadful. You're going to have a heart attack and die tomorrow night, but I don't think I'll tell you right now. So I just one more point, and then I'll get to you. But it said that this is so complex and multifaceted. But it said that when we're born, just before we actually come into the body, and Plato has this in his book called The Republic at the end, in a myth called the myth of E-R. He has this in a myth. But just before we take on a body, we're said to have an overview of the life we're about to go into. And then in the myth, having had that kind of flash of what that life's going to be, in the myth, we then have to cross this river, which is called the river of Lethe, which means forgetfulness. And every one of these souls that's about to be born has to take a little sip of this water. But most of them in the myth drink a little too much of this water, which means when they are born, they don't remember anything they saw before they were born. So everything is kind of a surprise. Whereas in fact, it said the general outlines of our entire life are already determined at birth. And it said, well, that sounds pretty deterministic. Yes, but we were the determinators. But there isn't that much leeway in a given lifetime, they say. But at the same time, when I asked a question about that proposition, well, what do you mean? You mean the whole damn thing's already played out? I mean, I'm just playing out what was already visible, like to a seer or one of these sages or seers at my moment of birth. I'm just playing out what they saw at my moment of birth. And the answer is yes. But they also say, the people that teach that they call it a life's curve, or the curve of a life. You know, let's picture a curve. They say every life has a curve, but almost nobody comes anywhere near maximizing that curve. So even though there's a whole thing there that's already there, in that sense making it seem kind of deterministic, even though self-determined, almost none of us take full advantage of the opportunities available in a given lifetime. And that gets back to the free will thing. You know, the actual taking one's will in hand and doing something with it. Because if there's no notion of a spiritual life or of quote-unquote spiritual progress, for whatever motive, you know, there are different motives, but for whatever motive, if there's no notion of that, a person's not going to probably take anything in hand except perhaps out here. You know, but a lot of people take things in hand out here, in body and circumstances, you know, and they want to be a successful businessman, they go do it. You know, but not many people take the mind and the intellect on, let alone the psyche and the astral plane on. And those are the ones that are actually the most causal, and therefore the most important to be attentive to, which is why all teachers try to get us to do something with our mind, you know, that's totally out of control and just on automatic pilot. And all that automatic stuff is generating causes, and when we all do it together, you know, we can have a war. You know, we can have an earthquake. You know, and we won't connect it to the earthquake. Another thing, if you read these aphorisms on karma, because it does say natural events are caused by collective human thought, not necessarily in the region where they're occurring. But it said in these aphorisms on karma that if a being is in an area where a cataclysm is about to occur, and his or her karma is not to be there, they will either be told to leave, or they will, for some reason, leave, and it'll happen in their absence, which is a very intriguing thought. Yeah, very intriguing thought.
We've all had neural escapes.
Well, yeah, you hear amazing stories about people that, you know, didn't get on the airplane they were supposed to get on. They're all pissed off because they missed their plane, because they had to go back and get their golf clubs, and then that made them late, and they missed the damn plane. They're all torqued out because they're going to be late to the business meeting. The plane crashed and everyone was killed.
Yeah, my boss on 9/11,
It-
he was supposed to be on Flight 78,
There you go.
and ended up just finding an earlier flight because he got out of his meeting early.
Yeah. See, that's an example of that principle. Yeah.
Two questions, or those are really questions. Are there more than two or definitions of karma? First question.
Mm-hmm.
And the current one that you're using now, okay, would lead me to come to the conclusion that there was never a time that human consciousness did not exist.
Correct. Well, at least not within the last 18 million years. That's the figure they give, the people that teach these things.
And I guess
Which means our current theories about, you know, how old humanity is are not even close.
and again, my first question is in relationship to karma. Are there more schools of thought on the definition or of karma?
Oh, sure. You can find all kinds of different ways of looking at karma.
Oh, okay, then the one that you're being with now,
Right.
the lineage of that definition?
The lineage of the view I'm presenting is it goes back to what's called what's called a Trans-Himalayan school, capital T, capital S, Trans-Himalayan school. It's said to be as old as mankind, which is said to be 18 million years old. So you're getting the claim that there's a body, Trans-Himalayan.
Okay.
The claim is that there's a body of beings who are fully enlightened, always have been, and that they have always taught certain sorts of things. This view of karma being one of them. Yeah. But there are other views, but they're from different lineages. Yeah. But all the views have in common that it has to do with a law of causation. You know, all views of karma share that. You know, it's got to do with very strict causation, karma, and that it's universal and is not exempt from from any speck of the universe. You know, there aren't little parts of it that are, jumping around, and not being affected by karma. Nothing. Yeah, it's kind of like saying, are there parts of the physical world not affected by the laws of physics? No. And nothing's exempt. I mean, laws are laws; they're universal, and some people try to fool karma or fake it out or something, but it can't be done.
Wasn't in around 300 AD there was the Nicene Council,
Mm-hmm.
which outlawed the teaching of reincarnation
And karma,
and karma,
right,
which was taught by Christ.
right.
Which
First
a lot of
three,
Westerners find shocking.
very shocking.
You know.
Yeah, the first 300 years of quote-unquote Christianity had both karma and reincarnation as part of it, and it's documented. It's not somebody's theory. And it's also documented when those two ideas were declared a heresy.
They canonized the religion, right?
Mm-hmm. And declared those ideas anathema.
Because certainly one reason would be it's a good way to control people.
Well, if you're developing a system that's going to control people through getting them to believe that they only live once, and that their eternal fate depends upon what they do this one life, if you're going to push that kind of system on people, you can't have karma and reincarnation as part of it. So it was taken out. I mean, all this is done. History is not what we read in the newspapers. And this was done very deliberately, very consciously. The people who did it believed in karma and reincarnation, but that wasn't the point.
It makes a lot of sense from a certain perspective.
Yeah, if your idea is to have power over humanity, then that's a very clever scheme. But you have to subtract karma and reincarnation out for it to work. Because if I believe in karma and reincarnation, then you're not going to get anywhere with me by telling me, between now and my moment of death, I have to be saved or I'm going to go to hell. It won't even make any sense to me. I won't even know what you're talking about. What are you talking about? It's crazy. I'm an immortal being, first of all, operating through 3 sets of vehicles, all of which are in a condition I myself have caused, and I have to deal with the condition those 3 sets of vehicles are in, but I'm an immortal being. My fate doesn't depend upon the whim of some god, let alone the blessing of some priest. or monk, or anybody.
Oh, reincarnation. Look at 442 on there. There's origin.
Yeah, origin.
And the karma.
Hmm.
And of course, they were thrown out.
Yeah, they're thrown out. Yeah. Yeah, these ideas are just starting to get a little currency again after 2,000 years. So these guys almost made it. Which is why, if you're interested in that whole side of it, it's worth reading the parable of the Grand Inquisitor in Dostoevsky's novel Brothers Karamazov, which H.P. Blavatsky said is the clearest statement of evil ever written. But it's a parable, but it's a parable about what you're just asking about. The whole scheme. It's about the whole scheme.
So karma's karma was to not allow karma to be eradicated.
No, it wasn't karma's karma. It was
Well, I was saying that-
Western humanity's karma.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I did want to mention before we stop that they talk. We've focused mostly on so-called individual karma because we all do have individual karma. But there's also such a thing, they say, as like humanity's karma, which is the effect of all beings on all planes having anything to do with humanity in the past has brought humanity to this point. So there's a collective karma that's almost unimaginable to try to get a handle on. And we can get little pictures of it, It doesn't look very good,
No.
But there is, like, humanity is a entity, even though most of us don't cognize that because we have it all divided up in our heads. But it really is an entity. Just like the Native Americans say the earth itself is an entity, it's a being. Well, humanity is a being, and its state is the product of what all of its units have done. So there's like collective human karma, and then they also speak, which can be understood by a sage or a seer, it said, or one of these fully enlightened beings can see it, and therefore know what if any measures might be effective in ameliorating some of the suffering in it. That would be the bodhisattva kind of approach. And then there's said to be national karma. So we're all in the United States of America. Well, it has a karma. And we're all part of it, whether we like it or not. It doesn't matter if we like it or not. We're all, there's a set of conditions that's about to radically change, but there's a national karma, and then in some cases it said there's family karma. But in this age, families are not like, you don't have all this extended family thing happening down generations like you used to. So they say there's less of that. And what used to be family karma has become, quote, distributed more in the national karma. And then there's individual karma. So all of us are involved, individual, national, collective, but probably only aware primarily of the individual. And the steps towards ameliorating it are probably what's most important, insofar as it can be ameliorated. If it couldn't be ameliorated, then the idea of a path to enlightenment wouldn't make any sense.
Karma wouldn't make any sense.
And karma wouldn't make any sense. But the interesting thing that sages teach is that even though one can lay down certain causes to ameliorate certain conditions, especially in the mind and in the psyche, which conditions are often characterized as obscurations, even though one can gradually ameliorate certain conditions, there's no set of causes one can lay down that will produce enlightenment. But there are sets of causes that can produce movement toward it. It's not an effect of a set of causes. Yeah.
It already exists.
Yeah, but we don't realize that. So they're causes we can set down so-called many spiritual practices we can engage in that will lead us toward its realization, but won't guarantee it.
That time frame, is that 18 million years that you talked about?
Uh-huh.
Then before the 18 million years, in their definition of karma, it was not?
No, karma is everywhere all the time,
No.
whether they're humans or not.
Before the 18
Yeah.
million years?
Yeah, everything's still ruled by karma. It's just
Okay, that's, thank you.
humans weren't here yet.
That was for their definition. I was just wanting to know.
Yeah, they're saying human beings, human consciousness has been on the planet, they teach, 18 million years
So human karma did not exist?
prior to that. But karma did. You know, cause and effect did. You know, things are,
Consciousness existed previous to that also.
yes, but not, quote, human consciousness. I mean, it's a long, deep story.
There's salt would to be enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, because we're definitely not, you know, from this standpoint, we're definitely not the, we didn't evolve from, say, primates. What evolved from primates was our form. Our form evolved from primates. You can kind of more or less show it. Yeah. But the question is, at what point did that form become self-conscious? Or have a consciousness in it that could cognize itself? And the teaching is 18 million years ago. And how did it get there? Well, there are these forms that had evolved to a point. Remember, karma has to have an instrument through which to operate. There are forms that had evolved to a point where that kind of consciousness could inhabit them. So it was a sacrifice to go into those forms so that those forms could have the consciousness in them that could move those forms toward enlightenment. But that's the big picture, and just in terms of Earth, and what we call humanity. So the consciousness we're talking about didn't evolve. It's eternal. But the forms it's inhabiting, including our current one, is historical. Historical, yeah.
Conditions ripen your consciousness, as you put it, sacrifice to enter.
These forms. Yeah.
Pretty painful.
Yeah, very painful. That's the Buddhist teaching, the first noble truth. There is suffering. Yeah, you enter one of these forms, you're going to suffer. Karma. Yeah. But karma. But see, then you get the negative idea of karma. I mean, you know, but there's joy is a fruit of certain kinds of causes too.
Some people might say what they would determine as bad karma. You know, if I'm experiencing quote bad karma, I'm burning that up, so it's a good thing.
Yeah, but rather than use bad, why not unpleasurable?
Okay, unpleasurable.
Or unpleasant.
So experiencing the unpleasurable. I mean, a simple way of putting it is, well, we're getting that out of the way.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe if we're not creating more.
Well, if the lesson's learned.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it'll come back. It'll keep coming back till we get it. And some of us know from experience. You know, like, why does this keep coming up? Because you haven't gotten it yet. You know, get it?
Me?
Yeah, you talking to me? Yeah. See, now these Advaitas, you know, they say, well, there is no self, you know, so they don't like to talk about karma and responsibility. And it's true, there is no self. But our karma is such that we don't know it. Or we can believe it, we can go around talking about it. Yeah, there's all's one, there's no self. Well, then, who's living your life? You know, who got up this morning? Who decided to brush their teeth or not? You claiming there's no one there? Give me a break. There's someone there. You'll be hiding out, you know. Well, not me, I don't exist. Okay, whatever you say. Take your word for it. But you do exist as a being in a body in a certain set of circumstances on 3 planes, and there's no way around it. And if you become enlightened, and that's a totally ambiguous word because enlightenment has countless degrees. So you might say there's an entry level, but then there's also, the fully enlightened one, Gautama. And the gap is like unthinkable, unfathomable between someone who's just kind of gotten over his or her personal self and a fully enlightened Buddha. I mean, the gap's just
Inconceivable.
yeah, inconceivable. But nonetheless, there is a level of enlightenment where a person is no longer cognizing in the mind and intellect, in the psyche, and even in the personal circumstances, they're no longer cognizing a personal self. And insofar as they live on that plane, their actions do not generate karma. They generate effects, but they don't generate something that's going to come back. Because there's no self from which it's going out. It's like these sports figures occasionally talk about being in the zone, where the things, the tennis game is playing itself. There's no awareness of yourself as the player. Suddenly it's just doing itself. Well, in that sense, it's karmaless.
Space ceased to exist.
Yeah, exactly. So even if a person became enlightened in a kind of beginning way, it's said that their actions aren't producing any further personal karma, but insofar as there's unexpended karma on any of those three planes, they will have to play it out in the life in which they became enlightened. They're still going to have to reap the effects of previous, things that they still have to deal with.
I guess a lot of the sting would have been taken out. But
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, these are the guys going around saying everything's okay. Even when you would think they'd be saying otherwise.
yeah, 30 years in a Chinese prison, being tortured and being okay with that.
Yeah.
That might be an example.
Oh yeah, or just going through a day and being okay the whole day.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, even though those stoplights are turning red on you.
Oh, not that.
Yeah. You can test this stuff at any level. How far along am I? Well, I don't know. How you do when you drive? Mentally, emotionally. I mean, you just calm and serene through the whole thing. Then you're probably making some progress of some kind.